For question 9, it asks, does resistance training and endurance training interfere with one another, and explain? So breaking down what happens with each. So when we are doing resistance training, the mechanoreceptors are activated because they sense movement is happening, and therefore that triggers the release of the enzyme mTOR. When mTOR is released, that increases the amount of protein synthesis that occurs in our body, and this means that we are creating new proteins which will become building blocks to help us achieve an increase in hypertrophy, or the increase in the size or number of muscle filaments within our muscle fibers. And these muscle filaments include actin-myosin, which help in the sliding filament theory, and the more we have of them, the stronger the contractions can be in our muscles, and the faster those contractions can then occur. Now, with the onset of endurance training, we release AMP kinase, which has two effects, but the first major one is that it increases our mitochondria biogenesis. AMP kinase is activated on the onset of increased ATP breakdown because we are trying to supply our muscles with more oxygen and more energy in order to sustain the endurance training we are placing on our body. And so AMP kinase is released on the increased production of ATP. Therefore, we increase our mitochondrial biogenesis, or we are increasing the number of mitochondria that we have in our muscles, therefore increasing the energy production that we can have in our muscles to sustain endurance training. How these two interfere is this key enzyme right here that is released by AMP kinase. It's activated by AMP kinase, and it is TSC2. What this enzyme does that interferes between endurance training and resistance training is it inhibits mTOR, the mTOR enzyme. This is important because when this enzyme is inhibited, that means that no protein synthesis can occur, and therefore no hypertrophy can occur, which the main goal of resistance training is to increase our muscle size and strength through hypertrophy. So one way to navigate this interference is by doing resistance training first and then endurance training. When we do resistance training first, that means that we can go through this whole process that's activated by these mechanoreceptors. We'll release mTOR, which will increase protein synthesis, which will then increase hypertrophy. If we do resistance training before endurance training, all these steps can occur, and then we will have the onset of AMP kinase, which will inhibit TSC2, but the hope is that we will go through enough protein synthesis to see some hypertrophy from our resistance training. It is also noted that doing endurance training more than 2 days a week for 30 minutes might have an effect, and you might not see much hypertrophy occur. This is again because this AMP kinase inhibits mTOR through this TSC2 enzyme.